It started as a quiet evening at a small roadside diner until a group of loud, rowdy bikers rolled in. Their presence was impossible to ignore, and soon their words turned sharp, targeting the lone black man sitting quietly in the corner. He was just there to enjoy his meal, but the bikers had other plans, testing his patience with insults and mockery. The other diners watched nervously, unsure of what might happen next. Would he snap under the pressure? But instead of anger, the man responded in a way no one expected. His calm demeanor and quiet words carried more weight than any shout ever could. What he did next not only silenced the bikers, but left everyone in the room stunned. Sometimes, strength isn't about matching force with force, it's about taking a stand in a way that leaves a lasting impact. Wait until you hear what happened next. The man, whose name was James, had been coming to this diner for years. He was known for his kindness and quiet demeanor, always offering a smile or a polite nod to the staff and regulars. That evening, he had just finished a long shift and stopped in for his usual coffee and pie. He had no idea his routine stop would turn into something much bigger. The bikers, on the other hand, were strangers to the diner. Their leader, a tall, rough-looking man with a booming voice, seemed determined to make a scene. The group laughed loudly, their remarks growing more pointed and cruel. They were trying to provoke James, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he sipped his coffee, his eyes steady but calm. The tension in the room was thick, and the other customers sat frozen, unsure if they should intervene. James's silence spoke volumes, but what was he planning? The bikers leaned closer, their taunts growing louder, testing James's patience with every word. One of them knocked a fork off his table, laughing as it clattered to the floor. James didn't react. He simply bent down, picked it up, and set it back on the table. His calmness seemed to irritate them even more. Meanwhile, the waitress behind the counter, a young woman named Sarah, glanced nervously at the door, wondering if she should call for help. She had seen James in the diner many times and knew he wasn't the kind of man to start trouble. But tonight felt different. The other customers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Some hoped James would stand up for himself, while others feared the situation could escalate. Yet, James remained calm, his expression unreadable. He wasn't scared, he was waiting for the perfect moment to respond in a way no one would expect. The leader of the bikers finally slammed his hand on James' table, rattling his plate and cup. The room fell silent, the sound echoing like a warning. "What's the matter?" Too scared to say something, he sneered, leaning in close. The other bikers laughed, their voices echoing through the diner. James looked up, his gaze steady but calm, his face unreadable. Slowly, he set his napkin down and folded his hands on the table. "You done?" he asked quietly, his voice firm but without anger. The leader blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. For a moment, it seemed like James had turned the situation around, but the bikers weren't ready to back down. The leader straightened, his voice growing louder as he tried to reassert his dominance. "You think you're smarter than us? Tougher? Prove it." All eyes were on James. His silence had held power, but now everyone was waiting for his next move. The air in the diner was electric, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. James didn't flinch under the leader's challenge. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his calm composure almost unsettling. "I don't have to prove anything to you," he said evenly, his voice steady. The bikers looked at each other, their smirks fading slightly as they realized they weren't getting the reaction they'd hoped for. But then, just as it seemed like the situation might de-escalate, one of the younger bikers grabbed James's coffee cup and slammed it onto the floor, shattering it. The room gasped, and the leader grinned, feeding off the sudden chaos. "Still too scared to fight back," he taunted. Before anyone could react, the diner door swung open, and in walked the local sheriff, a quiet but imposing figure who immediately surveyed the tense scene. His unexpected arrival shifted the energy in the room, leaving everyone wondering if things were about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The sheriff's boots echoed loudly on the floor as he stepped further into the diner. His sharp eyes moved between the shattered coffee cup, the tense group of bikers, and James, who remained seated, calm as ever. "Evening," the sheriff said, his voice steady but commanding. "What's going on here?" The leader of the bikers straightened up, his bravado faltering. "Nothing, Sheriff. Just talking." But the sheriff wasn't buying it. He glanced at James, who simply nodded in acknowledgement. "I think it's time you and your boys moved along," the sheriff said firmly. The leader hesitated, glancing back at his crew for support, but before he could respond, James stood up. He wasn't angry or shaken, he was purposeful. "No need, Sheriff," James said calmly. He looked the leader in the eye and added, "I think they've already learned what they needed to." The leader frowned, confused, but as he glanced around the room, he noticed something he hadn't before. The other diners were standing now, quietly but firmly watching, a silent wall of unity. The bikers weren't intimidating anyone anymore. They had been outnumbered all along, not by physical force, but by a collective strength they hadn't anticipated. Without another word, the bikers shuffled out of the diner, their bravado crumbling as they climbed onto their motorcycles. As the roar of their engines faded, the sheriff gave James a knowing nod before heading back to his patrol car. James sat back down, quietly picking up his fork to finish his pie. The room relaxed, but just before the waitress cleared the broken cup, James handed her a folded napkin. Inside was enough cash to cover his meal, and the mess left behind. The real twist. James didn't need to fight to win. His strength had been in his quiet dignity all along. As the tension dissolved, the diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The quiet hum of conversation resumed, and the clinking of dishes filled the air once more. James finished his pie in peace, offering a small nod to Sarah as she refilled his coffee with a grateful smile. The other customers, still shaken by the incident, approached James one by one, thanking him for the way he had handled things. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," an older man said, shaking his hand. "You reminded us all how to stand together." James gave a humble smile, brushing off the praise. He hadn't set out to make a point or prove anything. He had simply chosen to meet hatred with strength, not violence, and it had made all the difference. As James walked out into the cool night, the sheriff tipped his hat. "Take care, James," he said, and with that, the quiet man disappeared into the night, leaving behind a lesson that no one in that diner would ever forget.